Greetings, you wonderful warriors of the broken sword. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Nick.
And we are the Goslings, a digital speakeasy of free thinkers and explorers of esoterica, Christian authors extraordinaire, and weirdos with bad senses of humor.
That's right.
Hashtag brother love.
That's right. Hashtag brother love. Oh, man, we're glad everyone's joining us tonight. Let's see who is in the chat with us tonight. Who do we got? We got
a lot of cool friends in the chat. Oh, my
goodness gracious. Oh, we got the whole gang.
Goodness gracious me.
I'm going to start. Let's see. We got Tricky Subject, hey. Mama Shaw, a Cactus Kicker.
You're having a laugh.
You're having a laugh. Thank you.
That's I like it. I know sometimes we have to decipher them, but they're pretty clever.
Well, it's super small on my screen here. Daniela, Kara. Golly, Chris Caps is watching tonight.
What's up, Chris?
We got the whole fan family.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Richard Gross. Okay. Hey. You caught us, man. Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
Welcome. Good evening.
Yes.
And now that we have established a quorum, we can begin with our toast.
Yes, absolutely. You want me to lead this time?
Yeah, you lead this time.
Sure. All right, everybody, grab your drinking vessels and join us. I will say the first half, and then you can follow along with Nick on the second half. Take up the broken sword of your father
and strike down the darkness.
Amen. Coffee at 6 p.m. Good idea.
Good idea.
Good idea. Yes. No, it's not.
So we have an amazing interview to play for you. Of course, we interviewed the great Derek Gilbert. We're going to play that in just a second.
Yeah.
We're going to do our obligatories real quick first.
Yes.
First and foremost, you can support the channel by hitting the subscribe button. Take up the broken sword of your finger and strike down that subscribe button. Smack the bell.
Smack it like it owes you money.
Yeah.
Keep your pimp hand strong.
And if you're already a subscriber to the channel, hit the like button.
Yeah.
Just like the video or share it. That'd be amazing as well. That helps. It feeds the demonic algorithm.
The beast demon AI that we just got finished talking to Gary Wayne about.
Right. Oh, yeah. We just finished interviewing Gary Wayne, too. That's going to be next week. But yeah, hey, hit the like button. That'd be great. And let's roll. I'll start with our first sponsor. We're going to mention our two sponsors before we jump into our interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
The Kothon Spartan mug. These Kothon Spartan, look at these flashy, snazzy mugs here.
Venna, tell them what is one.
Hey, this is the Kothon Spartan mug, designed by Joel Cherico at Cherico Pottery. Go to chericopottery.com. Everyone is handcrafted, hand-painted. They are beautiful replicas of the mug of the Spartan. Drink like a Spartan. Drink like a man. Get yourself a Kothon Spartan. He designed these with Stephen Pressfield, by the way.
Yeah.
Check them out at chericopottery.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel has a ton of amazing products on chericopottery.com. He has a team of people who help him produce those. He makes so many, like not every one of them can be handmade by himself. So he has an amazing team that comes through and, helps him make all of these. It's a really cool American dream small business operation. And he has a website that he's working with Stephen Pressfield on right now. I'm trying to remember the name of it. We'll circle back to it if we can. But go to Cherico Pottery, go to his Facebook page, and you'll be able to see a bunch of stuff. He has a great Instagram too, which I actually think his Instagram is where I connected with him.
Oh yeah, I think so.
But super cool dude. We like Joel a lot, and he runs a killer business, and his products are awesome. Like these feel great. I love that they're black. So if you ever wanted to get your Spartan black broth, the infamous pig's blood black broth, you could drink it out of this and not even know what yeah. So it was genius stuff. And he's worked with Stephen Pressfield to design some other stuff in conjunction with Steve's books. And they have their whole operation going now, and it may be an auction website. I'll see if I can remember what the name of it is. And but check him out. And if you check him out, you'll be able to find all that stuff as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about that good-looking man scrub you got going on there.
my man Brillo pad.
Yeah, your
This is how I clean the floors. Just get down there.
Just get down there and rub your nose.
Works wonders. And then I have to rely on Giordani Jovanovic hair and skincare products for men, made by real men, made for real men. Or as I like to say, be as sexy as you are deadly. Give 007 a run for his money. Awaken your inner John Wick with Giordani Jovanovic hair and skincare products. Everything from lotions to hair growth serum to shampoos, conditioners, beard oils, beard balms. Mike Fisher is the owner and proprietor, and he is a friend of the channel. And he runs Giordani Jovanovic out of his place in Arizona, and he does a killer job. And we appreciate and admire him greatly. So yeah. And what's the one that you have? I have like 3 pitches, 3 little tags that I use. But Nick's is better than mine.
I have 2. The first one is you can stop breaking the 10th commandment and get yourself some Giordani Jovanovic. And the other one is men, give your better half a reason to doubt that. Giordani Jovanovic.
I especially love it when Nick says it in his transatlantic accent. His
give your better half the reason to doubt that.
It's awesome.
Giordani Jovanovic.
Giordani Jovanovic. All right. Yep.
Well, that was fun. Okay, there we go. All right, we got it all teed up now. We're ready to roll. You guys ready to hear some Derek Gilbert?
Yeah.
The man himself, talking about the mysteries of Israel and the old gods. You ready to roll?
I am ready. Yeah, we got a bunch of cool people in the chat. Kira's there. Mike Fisher is in the chat.
Mike, awesome. Welcome, Mike. Good evening.
Yeah, so we hope you guys enjoy this. We talked about Israel. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff with the great Derek Gilbert, author of many books, The Second Coming of Saturn being one that we have interviewed him about in the past. He runs Gilbert House, which has, Myth of Iron, Iron and Myth, and then he has like 3 or 4 podcasts that he runs, and he's interviewed us before for his channel. Yeah. One of his channels.
He's a host on Skywatch occasionally.
Skywatch.
He's on the panel there.
And he has a killer radio voice. I mean, if you're watching this, you probably already know Derek Gilbert is awesome. But if you haven't, you are in for a treat because
I'm breaking the 10th commandment right now.
Yeah. That's right. Oh, also, I want to give a special shout out to because I know he's watching. I want to give a special shout out to Pete from Creepy Little Book.
Oh, awesome. Hey, Pete.
Pete is always so sweet. He always mentions our channel whenever I leave a comment in the thing. And he always, he's been apt to mention in the past how he watches us, just sort of in the background. And he almost never comments. And I just want to say, Pete, like, your channel's awesome. We love you, buddy. He's got this new thing that he's doing called Dark Sayings, where he is going through reading the Bible. And if you like what we do, you would love Pete's Creepy Little Book channel. And it's going through a bit of a renovation right now, so it's cool to check out. But he's a good friend of the channel, and he's an awesome guy. And I know he's probably watching, so I just want to give him a shout out.
Very cool.
So, anyways, Derek Gilbert.
Derek Gilbert.
Let's do it.
Let's roll. We'll be in the chat with you guys.
Your YouTube feed is crap. Stop wasting your time watching bot-boosted shills and self-appointed gurus cloying for your attention. Instead, join the Goslings interview live stream and podcast. The Goslings, a dark-lit digital speakeasy of free thinkers. A super chat of radical truth-seeking wizards who eat trolls for second breakfast. Topics that'll make your mama's hair stand on end. Ideas that'll make your pastor's knees knock. Guests that will illuminate the hidden chambers of your mind. And interviews that strike down the darkness. Welcome to the Goslings.
You're recently back from a trip to Israel. Tell us about how things went and tell us about some of the greater sites that you saw.
Well, we were blessed to go out a few days early, and it's interesting the way God kind of put things together for this tour. Our good friend Messianic Rabbi Zev Poret was supposed to join us in Israel, and due to an unforeseen emergency with one of the staff members of his ministry, he was unable to join us. So 2 weeks out, he called and said, I have to cancel.
Ugh.
But we were able to get a hold of, Sharon and I were like, well, do we want to do this on our own? We've got 3 busloads of people coming, which means we'll have to hop from bus to bus to bus. Um, uh, and Sharon said, well, why don't you try to get a hold of Doug Van Dorn? And I had, mentioned this at the same time to Judd Burton. Doug and Judd, along with Brian Godawa, are regulars on a monthly roundtable on my podcast, A View from the Bunker, a series that we call Iron and Myth.
Yeah.
Judd gets credit for that, and that's an awesome name. And just mention it to Doug because Doug is the author of a book called Giants, Sons of the Gods, which is now just out in his 10th anniversary edition. And he gets credit for being the first one to spot through Google Earth the serpent mound of Bashan, which is this serpent-shaped ridge that's like 3 times longer and about 5 times higher than the serpent mound in Ohio.
Oh, wow.
And it's a quarter of a mile from Gilgal Rephaim.
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember the orientation, but it was like north.
It's due north of it.
Okay.
It's like 1,000 feet north of Gilgal Rephaim. And when you're on the ground, it just looks like a ridge. Oh, there's a little hill over there, and it's got some rocks on top of it. Well, those rocks, it's like 140 megalithic burials. So anyway, get in touch with Doug and said, hey, what are you doing in 2 weeks? And he said, why do you ask? Well, we told him what was going on and said, look, Lipkin Tours, who we've been coordinating our tours of Israel, they're happy to have you come along and cover your expenses. So he's like, let me see if I can get someone to cover my pulpit for a few weeks. And he did, thankfully. And so Doug and Janelle Van Dorn joined us out there. So we were able to go to some megalithic sites before the tour group got there. And Aaron Lipkin, who is the CEO of Lipkin Tours, is an archaeology fan like we are. He is, like us. Had I known 40 years ago what I know now, I probably would have studied archaeology. But, better late than never. Aaron was instrumental in helping move the dump pile from the excavations at the site of Joshua's altar 40 years ago. He and archaeologist Scott Stripling about 2 years ago were able to get into Mount Ebal and move that dump pile so that it wasn't lost because it's in Area A, which means it's technically, or Area B, so it's technically under the control of the Palestinian Authority. So I asked Aaron in an interview, how did you manage to do that under the radar? And he said, well, sometimes you can persuade the radar to look the other way, and that's all I can say about that. So anyway, that's who coordinates our tours of Israel. Cool. He's willing to take tour groups places other tours will not go. So when we suggested, hey, can we come out a few days early and visit some of these sites that we would like to see without the tour group around, because we wanted to visit this Serpent Mound of Bashan, plus a few other sites. Aaron was like, hey, that's great. Can I bring my video drone? He's got a 4K video drone.
Oh, wow.
And so we're like, yeah. So we spent a day.
I happen to remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we spent a day with Doug and Janelle Van Dorn, Aaron Lipkin, and the archaeologist who's done the most recent excavations, both at Gilgal Rephaim and on this Serpent Mound, which, archaeologists just referred to by the name of the Arabic village that was there prior to 1967, El Arba'in, which is boring. Serpent Mound of Bashan sounds so much cooler.
Yeah.
So we spent hours there with Dr. Michael Freakman as he explained to us what he found in his digs back in 2008, 2010, and on the back of that serpent-shaped ridge, which has got 140 megalithic burials, most of which have never been excavated. Now, most of them have been robbed out in antiquity, so there's really not much in there to find. You're not going to find like some Indiana Jones type, crystal skull or anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that you've got within eyesight of Mount Hermon a ridge covered with megalithic burials, a quarter of a mile from this monument that is bigger and about 1,200 years older than Stonehenge.
Whoa.
And according to Freakman, most likely dedicated to the cult of the dead, venerating what people 5,000 years ago believed were the spirits of their dead ancestors. That was a rare thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we were really blessed to do it. Now, it's not mentioned specifically in the Bible, neither of these locations, or some of the other sites we saw. We went to a dolmen field near the kibbutz called the Shamir kibbutz on the Golan Heights. That's even closer to Mount Hermon. I mean, you basically look up and you see, oh, there's the mountain where all of this stuff happened.
Yeah.
And you're standing in the middle of a dolmen field with more than 400 dolmens, including one that was only really examined about 10 years ago, and found that the biggest dolmen in the center of this dolmen field has a capstone that they estimated 50 tons, which is like, the equivalent of two fully loaded 18-wheel tractor trailers plus another 20-foot box truck on top of it.
Mhm.
And it's the first dolmen discovered north of Yemen that's got any inscriptions inside it.
Hmm.
So this is a site that's significant. The Israeli archaeologist who did the most recent dig there back in 2014, I think, say that they believe that this was the center of the dolmen building culture of essentially the Golan Heights and the valley through which the Jordan River runs between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee. So we got a chance to explore that, to go inside this thing. And meanwhile, Aaron Lipkin is up there taking his drone around and shooting aerial shots of these areas.
Yeah.
We also got to explore a site that we found really exciting, based on something that I just stumbled across last summer. And the more reading I do on this, the more I think we're right. We found a site that Dr. Freakman, the archaeologist I mentioned earlier, had written about kind of in passing in one of his papers, and then he wrote another paper about this site. It's called Khirbet Beteha. It's on the east bank of the Jordan River, about a mile and a half north of the Sea of Galilee. It's like a smaller version of Gilgal Rephaim. In other words, concentric rings of stone, megalithic basalt blocks around a central tumulus, probably a tomb at one point in history. But again, it's on the east bank of the Jordan River, a mile and a half north of the Sea of Galilee. It's about half a mile from ancient Bethsaida. Now, this is significant because in John 1, verse 28, we have been reading in chapter 1 of the Gospel of John how John the Baptist was confronted by scribes and Levites who'd been sent by the Pharisees in Jerusalem to find out who this John the Baptist is.
Yeah.
We've been taught that John 1:28, which reads, "These things took place in Bethany across the Jordan, where John was baptizing," that this is a site somewhere near Jericho, on the east side of the Jordan River. That's what across the Jordan means, but somewhere near Jericho, because the other three Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, put John's work somewhere in the Judean wilderness. And when you think Judea, we think of the tribe of Judah and its allotment, which is basically from Jerusalem and south. So it's got to be somewhere south near the Dead Sea. Except that here, well, two things. First of all, Bethany across the Jordan, there is no Bethany east of the Jordan River. Christians have been trying to find Bethany across the Jordan for 2,000 years. As early as the 3rd century, the early church theologian Origen went looking for Bethany across the Jordan. And he said, there's nobody here who's ever heard of this. There is no Bethany across the Jordan. So it must be, and even though he admits in his writings, Origen noted that the oldest and best Greek manuscripts of the Gospel of John read in Greek Bethania, translated Bethany into English. That's got to be wrong, because we can't find it. So it's this other place over here that the locals call Beth Abara, which means house of the crossing. And that's the place that the United Nations back in 2015 designated a World Heritage Site, and the Kingdom of Jordan is now spending like $30 million to develop it into a tourist location. The Palestinian Authority was mad because they wanted the site on their side of the Jordan River so they could get the tourist money. God bless the Jordanians. They don't really have much in the way of natural resources other than biblical history. So I
Mhm.
don't begrudge them trying to draw some Christians. And I will say this, the 3 times we've been to Jordan, we found the Jordanian people to be very friendly, very welcoming of Christians, very proud of the heritage, of the biblical heritage of their country. And so, if anyone ever goes to Israel, take the extra step, cross into Jordan, go visit Petra, go visit Madaba, go to Mount
Oh
Nebo.
yeah.
It's very, very. In fact, we'll talk about Amman and the museum in Amman here in a little bit, which is really cool. Anyway, this is why the King James translation today, drawing on the decision of origin, like 1800 years ago, to say no, Bethania has got to be wrong. It's Beth Abara. Jerome, when he translated the Vulgate, um, into Latin, he kept Origen's translation. It's Beth Abara. In the King James, John 1:28 says Beth Abara to this day. But in 1877, an explorer by the name of Claude Condor, he was a lieutenant in the British military, archaeologist. He did surveys of Palestine for the Palestine Exploration Fund. This was when the European powers had figured out that the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, and they wanted to send their guys to Palestine to do archaeology.
Right.
See what's on it. And meanwhile, they're reporting back to the Foreign Office as well. They did really good archaeology. Condor's friend, Sir Charles Warren, is the one who found that inscription in the temple on the summit of Mount Hermon that said, those who swore an oath proceed from here by
Right.
order of the Most High and Holy God, essentially a reference to the Watchers.
Right.
Warren also found the Misha Stela, the one that describes that incident in the Bible with King Jehoshaphat and the king of Moab, except
Yep.
told from the point of view of the king of Moab. Anyway,
Is that the one
Condor
where,
wrote,
is that when he sacrifices his own son on the wall and
yes,
the
that's the one.
Israel actually flees? They actually lose that battle.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an attestation, and they've, by the way, confirmed now that stela does make reference to the house of David on it.
Okay.
So there you got an attestation outside the Bible of the existence of King David, which, again, a lot of secular scholars try to overlook or pretend doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Anyway, Condor was a friend of Sir Charles Warren's, and he wrote that Bethania was probably a transliteration of the 1st century Roman name Botania, which was the Roman name for Bashan. So, in other words, John was not baptizing at Bethany across the Jordan. He was baptizing in Bashan across the Jordan,
Interesting.
the
Okay.
region of Bashan. Now, for your viewers not familiar with Bashan, in a nutshell, the ancient world, from the time of Abraham down to the time of Jesus, everyone knew that Bashan was the entrance to the underworld. It was literally the gate to hell.
Oh wow. Okay.
Bashan is a cognate for a Ugaritic word, Bathan. Ugaritic was an Amorite language, very similar to Hebrew. It means place of the serpent. In fact, in Akkadian, which is another Semitic language similar to Hebrew, the cognate term is Bashmu, and Bashmu was the name of a 7-headed chaos dragon that had to be defeated by a warrior god like Ninurta to create order so that humanity could, live.
Wow.
Is there any
So-
connection between that and like the beast that we see in Revelation with 7 heads rise up out of the sea?
Well,
I wonder.
that is speculative, but I believe
like
that Psalm 68 is prophetic, and in Psalm 68 we see. And I'm going to rabbit trail here a little bit since you brought it up.
Go for it.
You're welcome.
Eric's like, you stepped in it, now you get it.
That's right. Psalm 68, beginning at verse 15, reads, "O mountain of God, mountain of Bashan." Mike Heiser, our friend who passed away just 2 months ago, pointed out that in Psalm 68:15, the phrase in Hebrew, Har Elohim, can also mean mountain of gods, mountain of Bashan. And that's probably a more accurate translation because the mountain of God is Zion. It's the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So, O mountain of gods, mountain of Bashan, many peaked mountain, mountain of Bashan, why do you look with hatred, O many peaked mountain, at the mount that God desired for his abode, yes, where the Lord will dwell forever? This is, why is Mount Hermon 9,200 feet looking at Mount Zion in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, which is, 2,000 feet, and looking with hatred at that mountain? Well, it's because that's where God has chosen to live, Jerusalem, not Mount Hermon. The chariots of God are twice 10,000, thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. And the Net Bible translates the next line better. The Lord comes from Sinai in holy splendor. You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train. It's like this is describing war in the heavenlies, where God attacks what was essentially the Canaanite Mount Olympus and takes away captives. Then you go down to verse 21, verse 20, which I think you get into a prophetic segment of Psalm 68. Our God is a God of salvation, and to God, the Lord, belong deliverances from death. Death in Hebrew, that's Maveth, that's a cognate for Mot, which is the death god in the Canaanite religion. In other words, the equivalent of Thanatos, the rider on the pale horse in the Greek. Belong deliverances from death. But God will strike the heads of his enemies, the hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. The Lord said, I will bring them back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that you may strike your feet in their blood, that the tongues of your dogs may have their portion from the foe. Now, that sounds kind of gruesome and grisly, but I mean, we're talking about war. This is serious. Yeah, I thought you might appreciate that, Jonathan.
Yeah, keep going. You got more of that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was reading Grey Aegis on the plane, by the way, to...
Really?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Your book's been to Israel, bro.
My book has been to the Holy Land, back to the source.
Actually, I was reading on the plane to Pennsylvania to Mike Heiser's memorial, but still.
Well, you know what? That's okay.
It made the flight go very quickly. But a scholar by the name of Nicholas Wyatt wrote that this verse 22, I will bring them back from Bashan, I will bring them back from the depths of the sea. He argues that a better translation is this: from Bashan, I shall bring back from the depths sea. And he capitalizes the word sea. Now, why is that relevant? Because sea in Hebrew is Yam, which is the Canaanite name for Leviathan, the seven-headed chaos dragon, who we believe, Sharon and I, is the spirit that will indwell the human that we'll call Antichrist.
Okay.
Because you got that seven-headed monster that comes out at the beginning of Revelation 13, just emerging from the depths, emerging from the sea, which is the representation in the Bible of chaos, primordial chaos. The chaos dragon in ancient Mesopotamia, from Sumer to the Canaanites to the Hurrians and Hittites, was always a multi-headed dragon who had to be defeated by a warrior god like Baal or Ninurta or Enlil or Marduk, the storm god Teshub for the Hurrians. It's the same story over and over. The true story, of course, is God subduing Leviathan.
Yeah.
And then eventually doing away with it in Revelation 21, where there's a new heaven and the new earth, and the sea is no more. But here, I think, I will bring back from Bashan, Yam, chaos. Well, Bashan, again, Bashmu, is this seven-headed chaos dragon. And the significance of the visit to this serpent-shaped ridge near Gilgal Rephaim is that in the middle of the ancient region called Bashan, named for this chaos monster, you've got a 3/4 of a mile long serpent-shaped ridge, 200 feet wide, covered with megalithic tombs.
Yeah.
Probably for the cult of the dead.
Yeah.
So it's probably a natural formation. That area was volcanic thousands of years ago. But, even if it's not, Doug Van Dorn and Judd Burton have written a paper that's not yet been peer-reviewed and published, but they point out that the amount of earth you would need to move to create it is less than the amount of earth that was stacked up at Monk's Mound, which is the big mound at Cahokia in Illinois.
Okay.
So it's doable. We just don't know. But even if it was a natural ejection of lava that cooled in the shape of this, 3/4 of a mile long serpent, the fact is it was venerated in the ancient world. And Dr. Michael Freakman dates the tombs and the dwellings on the back to the late Copper Age, early Bronze Age. So 3,500, 3,200 BC, somewhere in there. And Gilgal Rephaim is even older. dated, he put it at about 3700 BC, give or take a couple hundred years. So going back almost 6,000 years,
Wow.
there was something about that region and that shape, a serpent-shaped ridge, a humongous serpent-shaped ridge in the middle of a land that came to be known as Place of the Serpent, Bashan.
Yeah.
And this is apparently where Jesus chose to be baptized, in Bashan across the Jordan. It was a declaration. Here's where I'm going to put my ministry.
Yeah, where it's needed most.
And where it's needed most. Now, it's not just the name of the place, that Bethany, that is the clue. When you continue reading in John chapter 1, you read John 1:29. Bethany across the Jordan where John was baptizing, in verse 29, John puts a timestamp on it. The next day, he saw Jesus coming toward him and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Okay, so Jesus is right there where John was baptizing. And based on the clues in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we can assume that this was about the time that John baptized Jesus there in this location. And then in verse 35, the next day again, so now this is 2 days after he's confronted by the scribes and Levites, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked by and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Now, one of them, we read later, was Andrew, the brother of Peter.
Yeah.
And he went and got Peter, took Peter to Jesus. Jesus looked up and said, "You're Simon, son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which means Peter. So, all right, those are the first two disciples. Guess where they're from? Bethsaida, which is a mile north of the Sea of Galilee.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And
right.
Andrew and Peter were partners in a fishing business with John and James.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the site in Jordan, and I checked this on Google Maps, the UNESCO certified baptismal site is 90 miles away. Now, today, 90 miles could be a nice road trip. Hey, let's check out this new restaurant in the next town over. But when you had to walk it back in the day across that terrain, which is pretty mountainous, that's like a week.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
John was baptizing north of the Sea of Galilee. And of course, in verse 43, more confirmation. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. So the first three apostles called from Bethsaida, north of the Sea of Galilee. James and John were from Capernaum, which is also north of the Sea of Galilee.
Yep.
So again, what are the odds that Jesus got baptized 90 miles away when John, according to all of the evidence, the geographic evidence, the most specific geographic evidence is in the Gospel of John, and it's all north of the Sea of Galilee. And what's even more interesting is this: when you look at the and we may have talked about this previously, but I think this is so cool it bears repeating. In the Gospel of Matthew, when John gets arrested by Antipas, Herod Antipas, for criticizing him for stealing his brother Philip's wife.
Right.
John, let's see, Matthew 4, verse 12. When he heard John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea. Now, Capernaum is on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's the opposite side of the Sea of Galilee from Jerusalem, not to put too fine a point on it. In the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. And here Matthew quotes Isaiah chapter 9, which is that messianic prophecy that includes the line, "Unto us a son is born, unto us a child is given." He quotes, "The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." The way of the sea is the Roman road, the Via Maris.
Oh, okay.
Tracked up along the west side of the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum, and then it followed the Jordan River north to the site of the ancient city of Hatzor, and then it cut up northeast right through the heart of Bashan to go to Damascus. The way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. So Isaiah, and then quoted by Matthew, saying, okay, the Galilee extended that far north and beyond the Jordan. Now here's the money quote: "The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, And for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. Now remember Psalm 68 connecting Bashan to God being a God of salvation, delivering us from death.
Yeah.
Jesus moving to Capernaum, which is at the south end of a valley through which the Jordan River flows from Mount Hermon down to the Sea of Galilee. That valley is surrounded by dolmens. On the hills on either side of that valley, it is ringed with dolmens, with the highest concentration being at that kibbutz that we talked about earlier, the Shamir kibbutz, the one with the 50-ton capstone right in the center of it.
Yeah.
We think that is the valley of the shadow of death. And we think
I was just going to ask.
that John may have been baptizing in the Jordan below that megalithic site, Kerbet Beteha, which means ruins of Bethsaida, by the way, which would have been visible. It's like on a 50-foot, the bank is like 50 feet high. So you look up from the river and you see this megalithic structure up there on the hill. And Jesus getting baptized there in Bashan across the Jordan, and then moving to that region to declare war on people dwelling, not the people dwelling, but the forces of death. In other words, the spirits of the Nephilim, the giants destroyed in the flood of Noah, demons.
Yeah. Well, and the ruling principalities and powers of that region. I mean, that seems like I actually thought about this yesterday, Derek. It's very apropos that you bring this up, this sort of thing. I worked all weekend for my day job handling this festival. And one of the things in the festival was in downtown Franklin, right in front of, there's a Catholic, I think there's just one Catholic church, St. Philip's, in downtown Franklin. But right in front of that Catholic church is where the Native American, Diversity Hire Act has decided to every year hold their whatever, their feather rain dance, skull dance thing, and their Quetzalcoatl cult, and they do their little tribal dance, I mean, you're basically staring at the ghost of a defeated culture. But like there is an aspect of this, I see this through, a crusader's eyes, and I'm like, this is basically like this is a conqueror's mentality on a spiritual level of like
marking territory.
Yeah, they're like doing all their prep work in the in the lawn of the Catholic Church, and look, I hold no special favors for Catholicism, but it's still Christian.
Well, we saw
and
the
you
same
having
thing.
a pagan ritual take place. Why, out of all the places in downtown Franklin, so anyways, I use that as like a dark mirror of what you're talking about with John the Baptist and Jesus all going to the locations of their enemy, into the heart of enemy territory, and doing works for their side.
And we saw it in New York. We saw it when I took Rihanna to New York. Directly in front, you have St. Patrick's Cathedral. Rockefeller Center was built directly across the street. And they intentionally built that giant statue of Atlas facing the double doors.
Oh, yeah. Right?
Opposing the church. They did it intentionally. They even said they did that intentionally to oppose the powers of the church.
See?
They're marking their territory, challenging the the set authority.
And we bring this up because like not everybody, there are some normies who, would watch this and be like, "Oh yeah, well what's the big deal, with but the reality is like no, that is the reality. Like you go to, that is a spiritual battle going on there where people invade the enemy's territory.
And Jesus does it again. Later on in his ministry, he goes back to Caesarea Philippi.
Right. Yeah. Right. And our friend Dr. Judd Burton, when I interviewed him on my podcast, and there, as you say, normies will look at this and say, well, you guys are just, you guys are fixated on the sensational, and that's why you're talking about this stuff, because this stuff really isn't all that important to Christians. But it really is. I asked Judd, what do you say when people hit you with this accusation that you're just looking for something sensational to make a name for yourself? He said, 2 words, Caesarea Philippi. And of course, that's at the north end of Bashan. It's at the foot of Mount Hermon, which I'll say again, the closest comparison you can draw is Mount Olympus,
Yeah.
except that Hermon is much older than Olympus. It is known to have been sacred to pagans as far back as the time of Abraham.
Yeah.
There's a reference to Mount Hermon in the old Babylonian text of the Gilgamesh epic, where
Oh,
Gilgamesh and his buddy Enkidu have to go slay Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest. And
mhm.
after they do, they, according to the text, they enter the depths of the cedar forest and they find the secret dwelling of the Anunnaki.
Hmm.
Now, the Anunnaki by that time had been sort of demoted from being the great gods of Sumer to judges of the netherworld, but that reinforces this connection in the Ugaritic texts
Mhm.
of the region below Mount Hermon being the entrance to the netherworld.
Yeah.
So this location where Jesus took his disciples to Caesarea Philippi, the Grotto of Pan, today it's called Banyas, was a special trip to make a specific spiritual point. I mean, I had to look at a map, not knowing the geography of the ground. For us today, it's like, oh, okay, they went to Caesarea Philippi, big whoop. But when you're walking everywhere, and from those of us who grew up in the Midwest, where there are no mountains. Okay, I grew up in Illinois, which is as flat as a pancake, except for the northwest corner and the very southern edge near the Ohio River.
Yeah.
You don't really understand how difficult it is. I'll give you an example. I didn't understand the need for a bicycle with gears on it until a multi-speed bicycle until I moved out of Chicago, because what do you need gears for? It's flat. This is silly. This is showing
Yeah.
off to have a 3-speed. Anyway, Caesarea Philippi was about a 30-mile walk from Capernaum through some pretty rugged territory, because you have to descend into the Hula Valley, which is that valley the Jordan River runs through, and you're walking along the edge of a marsh, which is no great, no fun either, especially in the summertime. It's been drained since then. Now it's just really fertile farmland. But back in the day, it was a great big swamp. And then you got to climb back up the mountains on the other side to get up to Caesarea Philippi. So you had to make a specific trip that was going to take you about 3 days to walk from one place to the other. And when
Wow.
you read the sequence of events in Jesus' life, you see that prior to this, he'd been in what is now Lebanon. He'd been in the region of Tyre, where he healed the daughter of the Syro-Phoenician woman. The one who said, even the dogs will eat the
Oh, yeah.
crumbs that fall from the master's table. Well, the road from Tyre back to where Jesus based his ministry, Capernaum, ran east to about the location of Dan, which is only a couple miles west of Caesarea Philippi. And then it cuts south along that valley down to the Sea of Galilee. So on the way back, Jesus could have said, hey, fellas, as long as we're in the neighborhood, let's go over here. I got something to say, but I need to say it in front of this great big cave that everybody knows is the literal entrance to the underworld.
Yeah.
No, they went back to the Sea of Galilee first, and he ministered there. He fed the multitude, he healed people, and then he took them on a special journey back to this location, which for observant religious Jews must have been horrifying, must have made their skin crawl. Why are we here? There's a temple to Caesar Augustus here. There's a temple of Jupiter here. There's a temple to Pan here. There's a
Mhm.
temple to Nemesis here. There's an Asclepion, the healing center with all the snakes that crawl around in it and crawl all over the sick
It's like
people.
going to Mount Doom.
Mhm.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Why are we going here?
Yeah.
At the base of the mountain that, like I said, is the equivalent of Mount Olympus. It's where the gods of the Canaanites meet. Why are we here? And that's
Yeah.
where Jesus declares, on this rock I will build my church, standing at the base of a 9,000-foot mountain. And the gates of hell, this really big cave right over here.
Mhm.
In the first century, Josephus said no one had ever lowered a plumb line long enough to hit the bottom of the cave.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it's changed since then, thanks to earthquakes. That used to be the origin of the Jordan River, that one of the streams that converged to make the Jordan River. It comes out further below the mountain now. But, back in the day, source of the Jordan River, literally coming out of the netherworld, and Jesus is standing right there with his disciples saying, the gates of hell, which, right over here, will not prevail against my ecclesia. And the significance there, we hear the word church. Gates of hell will not prevail against my church. But the Greek term ecclesia means my assembly, my congregation. And that's important because it was believed in the ancient world that the congregation or the assembly of the gods met on the summit of mountains.
Yeah.
In Isaiah 14, the rebel from Eden is criticized for wanting to establish his mount of assembly, his Har Moed in the heights of the north, the sides of the north, the uttermost north. That's the point. Jesus is saying, my assembly, I am God, or just I am, and my assembly will be established on this rock. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And then, of course, 6 days later, according to Matthew, he climbs that mountain with James and Peter and John.
Yep.
And is transfigured. And then when he comes down, he sends out the 70 or 72, depending on your translation, ahead of him. But the significance is the same. He was basically saying to these spirit beings on the Canaanite Mount Olympus, where they believed that their creator god, El, lived with his 70 sons, a number representing all of them. In other words, all the gods of the nations were the sons of El. Jesus climbs the mountain, transfigures into a being of light. It's like sending a flare into the spirit realm. And then he comes down and sends out the 70 disciples ahead of him.
That's so cool.
And they come back and say, the demons are subject to us in your name.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then he goes to Jerusalem to fulfill his mission. So the significance of this, my ecclesia is more powerful than your ecclesia. And I'm going to and I'm going to stick a thumb in your eye on the summit of your mountain.
That's awesome.
And now we're talking.
This is exactly what he's doing. This is cosmic. This is sacred geography.
Yeah.
And when people come to us and say, well, you're just fixate. Why did you talk about Jesus? Yeah, let's talk about Jesus. Why did Jesus get baptized in Bashan across the Jordan? Why did Jesus declare his divinity at the base of Mount Hermon to his human followers, and then on the summit of Mount Hermon to the spirit realm? Yeah. Why did Jesus do that?
Yeah.
So most of those people don't have an answer. They just, that's just okay.
They're too worried about the Beatitudes, Derek. This is you're like playing 5D chess, and some of us are still on checkers.
Well, they want Jesus to continue on with that metaphor. I think they're just comfortable if everything is just checkers level. They need
that's a good
to be
point.
Checkers level for them.
Yeah,
they don't want to have to think too deeply about it. When we all know that every single word in Scripture is there for a very specific reason, and Jesus made these decisions for very specific reasons.
Yeah,
why? The answer might be uncomfortable.
Well, and if more people talked about what you're talking about, Derek, in the pulpit, I mean, it would get more people interested. It would mean more, because then it doesn't seem like just a collection of Bronze and Iron Age folk tales from some little, dirt monkey tribe in the middle of nowhere that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of the planet, and human civilization. Like when you start really getting in depth with the things that you get into depth on with the sacred geography and these sorts of spiritual aspects of things. Like if I had heard that basically when I was 17, 18, I would have cared more,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And because people don't, like a lot of pastors, I think, don't give their congregation enough credit. All right. Thus is the first half of the Derek Gilbert interview. What do you guys think so far? Pretty rad, huh?
You guys in the chat seem to be really enjoying it.
Yeah, we've had some great conversations going in the chat. And Nick's going to get part 2 queued up here real quick. And while he does, I am going to do a little bit of proselytizing for our side hustle. I don't even know what to call it at this point.
Yeah, it's a side hustle, yeah.
Our passion projects.
Yeah.
So the Goslings started out as a writers group. Nick and I are a couple of Christian novelists. I wrote the Heavenly Realms books. Nick has written the Travelers League series for kids, as well as Henry Half Moon. And, even though the Goslings has evolved into this amazing interview live stream channel, at its heart, we are still kind of a writer's group.
We are.
in a way.
Yep.
And
we are.
we have books that are available. So I wrote a 7-novel series about the wars between the angels. It's Christian fantasy angelic warfare. It's sort of like Gettysburg meets 300,
Yeah, that's it.
And 6 of the novels are published. The 7th one is in the editing phase. And all of them also are narrated by our good friend and original interview guest, Adam Burrell.
Adam Burrell from the UK.
Yeah, so Adam poured his heart and soul into those audiobooks, and he does a phenomenal job. He is a dead ringer for Alan Rickman as far as his
Yeah.
voice. It is awesome. And Adam is the son of an Episcopalian priest? Anglican priest. And Adam is a real sweetheart. He is a huge supporter of us and the channel. So, and he's narrated some of Nick's books as well. Obviously, if you have an Audible account, then the audiobooks are pretty cheap. We encourage everyone to support Adam in that endeavor because that's his passion.
Yep.
And we're all about striking down the darkness, taking up the broken sword of your father, inheriting the legacy of whatever your father had, carrying it forth and doing the Lord's work. And for me and Nick, that really was...
That means writing books.
Writing books. And for Adam, that means narrating them. So our books are available in paperback or ebook. But if you want to support us and our good friend Adam, whom we've interviewed multiple times, check him out on Audible. And the QR code is right there. You can scan the QR code for my Heavenly Realms series. Empyrean Falling is the first book. There are 6 others after that. I guarantee you by the time you get finished with the series, the 7th one will be out, unless you're a speed reader. Asterisk. Not available in all countries. Consult your physician before. So. But anyways, I also want to talk about Nick's book.
Yeah, sure.
Let me talk about your
Henry
cool
Half
book.
Moon by it. Okay.
Yep.
And we're done.
Genius.
Henry Half Moon.
Yeah.
This is I would call it a paranormal urban fantasy.
Yeah.
About a guy who can cross into the other dimension. He doesn't know that he can until it actually happens. And he realizes that he's been specially called to carry out an angelic mission.
Nice.
That doesn't sound exciting. Yeah, it's exciting when you realize he doesn't have faith, and this is all about his kind of faith journey. Anyway, the setting is Manhattan. The situation is there is a new race of demon called the Algalim who are trying to usher in the coming of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
And this young college student in Manhattan is chosen by gods he doesn't believe in to thwart that plan.
Yeah.
And it goes horribly wrong. I will tell you that.
Mike Fisher said, your book is really good, Jonathan. Thank you, Mike. I'm really glad you appreciate it. I always appreciate reviews if anybody has ever, and Nick and I both, whether it's Nick's Travelers League series, which is middle grade fiction, which is really cool and really fun, very homeschool friendly, adventurous.
Very much so.
Love the Travelers League series. Or his Henry Half Moon book, which is like young adult, you know, or the Heavenly Realms, which is more like fighting age male type, you know. I mean, if you're like a young adult, you could maybe get it, you know, and it's a little wordy for teenagers, but that's okay. That's what a dictionary is for. Yeah, if you like our stuff, if you've happened to ever be given a copy of a book or purchased one or anything, dude, leave a review. Amazon reviews, you have no idea how much Amazon reviews help
big time
artists
big
and authors and stuff like that. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. We always like to try to make a point to actually mention that stuff because, like, I don't think we did for like a year.
Yeah, we need to
we
get
like
better
totally
at that.
forgot for like a
gotta
year
get
to
better,
talk about the
for
books.
sure.
So anyways,
we can mention the other stuff at the end.
Yeah,
give us something to do. I got the second part of Derek's interview queued up.
Cool.
Ready for you guys? Anything else you want to cover?
One thing I really liked about what Derek brings to the table, aside from a commanding radio voice.
No, it's beautiful.
Derek has like the greatest
voice
ever, and he knows how to articulate. Derek is so great at not only packaging and presenting this sort of esoterica to you guys, but also he does, and we kind of talked about it towards the end. He does something that's really important. People regard a lot of this stuff in the normie church community as being empty calorie or sidebar or some sort of distraction or sidetrack. And it's like, no, it's in the Bible, therefore it's important.
That's exactly
Okay.
right.
So
Yeah.
there are people who make cases for like the lineage chapters of, what is it, Numbers or Leviticus or whatever, where it's like, it's just names after names.
Yeah, multiple places in the scripture.
So, okay, that stuff is
It's
important.
It's all very important. Yeah, absolutely.
This stuff is no less important. And I'll tell you, if people were talking about this when I was coming up, when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, like I would have been far more interested in going to church and learning about the Bible than I was. So it's a great
100%.
disservice that pastors don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
And what Derek does, I mean, that really, in my mind, that is Derek's ministry.
Yeah.
Whether it's Iron and Myth, View from the Bunker, anything that Gilbert House produces. His website is derekpgilbert.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
And or if it's just like his books, The Second Coming of Saturn, his wife Sharon's books, The Red Wings Saga, all this stuff, if it was packaged and presented to people on a broader scale at younger ages, you wouldn't really have much to compete with as far as like Lord of the Rings, or comic books. And Rob Skiba, the late great Rob Skiba, used to talk about that all the time, that like, dude, if you think like Marvel movies are wild, if you think like Lord of the Rings is crazy, try the Bible. And it sounds cheesy until you get into it and you start reading it.
Oh yeah.
Whoa, here we go.
Yep.
So anyways, Derek indulges us. He indulges my rants. He's a sweetheart. And he is incredibly knowledgeable, and we are super excited to present to you the second half of the Derek Gilbert interview.
Here we go. Part 2.
Vertical punch. 90% extension.
It's coming up here in a second, I promise.
90% extension.
Don't need to click it again.
You gotta put the knuckle. Top 2 knuckles.
And this
All
is
right,
Well,
this is-
and that's why, and I think that's why people get excited by the work of people like Mike Heiser and
Yeah.
Judd Burton, Doug Van Dorn, what Sharon and I have been blessed to do.
Yeah.
And really, all we're trying to do is take the divine counsel concepts that Mike Heiser taught and popularized. I don't know if popularized is the right word, but made accessible is a better way of putting it to those of us in the pews, and apply it to Scripture. Why? And of course, Mike wrote a book that is essential reading for everybody who really takes the Bible seriously, Reversing Hermon, which shows how significant all of this is. The Tom Horn's brilliant subtitle, the Forgotten Mission of Jesus. He was reversing not just the sin of Genesis chapter 3, the rebellion of Adam and Eve in the garden, but also the sin of Genesis chapter 6. And what the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 did, which was not just a sexual sin in crossing the species barrier between divine and human, but also the forbidden knowledge that they taught that has continued down to this day, occult practices and teachings, veneration of the spirits. One of the things that startled me in the research for my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, is that the prohibition against consulting mediums and necromancers is everywhere you find it. It is also connected to the prohibition against burning children in the fire to Molech.
Okay.
And in that book, I identify Molech as the leader of this rebellion. I believe Molech is Shemiyaza, the leader of that rebellion in Genesis chapter 6. He's only named, of course, in the book of First Enoch, but I think he's gone by many names throughout history. Saturn, Kronos, Baal Haman, El, Enlil, Dagon, Ashur, Kumarbi, and of course Molech, the alternate name of Milcom, the chief god of the Ammonites.
And that's sort of the central conceit of The Second Coming of Saturn, right?
Yep.
One of your books,
Right.
your latest book. Yeah.
Because I believe that he is also the one that they call the destroyer, or Apollyon, Abaddon. And this is because of the references in the Old Testament to Solomon building the high place for Milcom / Molech on the summit of the Mount of Olives,
Mhm.
which, because he did that, was referred to in our English Bibles call it the Mount of Corruption, but and that's Har Ha Mashkith in the Hebrew. But you've got a problem there with the translation Har Ha Mashkith equals Mount of Corruption, because the Hebrew word ha means the. It's the definite article the. So how do you get Mount of Corruption when there's supposed to be the word the in there?
Yeah.
So thanks to, I don't read or speak Hebrew, but I can use search engines,
Yet.
and thankfully Logos Bible Software has really good search engine. And you find when you search for that term, that word ha mashkith actually means the destroyer. You find it a couple of other places in the Old Testament. So Mount of the Destroyer. So I put this to a couple of friends who do speak and read Hebrew, Rabbi Zeph Poret, Jonathan Kahn, and both of them were like, yeah, that's reasonable translation. I said, okay, now think about this. This then becomes Mount of the Destroyer, the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus spends the last week of his life dividing his time between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. He goes to the Temple Mount, he teaches, casts out the money changers, and basically calling, even though the temple had been enlarged and expanded, and the Temple Mount expanded by Herod the Great, who was not a nice man, Jesus still called that my Father's house. But then on the Mount of Olives, he makes the triumphal entry from Bethphage on the Mount of Olives. He delivers the Olivet Discourse, which is his longest teaching on what's going to happen in the end times.
Yep.
On the Mount of Olives. That's why it's the Olivet Discourse.
Yep.
He's betrayed on the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane. I show the evidence in that book as to why the Mount of Olives is where he was crucified. And according to the scriptures, the Gospel of John, he was buried in a tomb in a garden where he was crucified. That also then on the Mount of Olives. We believe it's the grotto beneath the Church of the Pater Noster. Thanks to Zev Poret for pointing that out to us. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, God bless Constantine's mother, Helena. She meant well, but there were a lot of guys, in the 4th century who were more than happy to show her what she wanted to find. Sure, we got the true cross right over here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, he descends into the abyss. According to 1 Peter 3, he proclaimed to the spirits in prison. And the word translated spirits from the Greek there, pneumasin, is not used of human spirits in the New Testament unless it's specifically qualified as such, which it is not here. In other words, he was not proclaiming to the human dead in Sheol. He was speaking to the spirits who disobeyed in the days of Noah, according to Peter. The sons of God from Genesis 6.
Yeah.
As Mike Heiser put it, Jesus said something to the effect of, I've got a news flash for you. At dawn of the 3rd day, I'm getting out of here, and you're still dead. So he is resurrected on the Mount of Olives, and according to Zechariah 14, he returns on the Mount of Olives, and it splits in half. Again, this mount that was called the Mount of the Destroyer because of the high place to Molech.
Yeah.
Abaddon, Apollyon, Shemiyaza. I think all of this is a very long war against all of the divine rebels that have rejected God's authority, Satan among them. But I think this other entity, Shemiyaza, kind of gets forgotten in the long war. The spirit realm is a lot more complicated than most of us have been taught. And when you start digging into it, you realize, okay, God calls them giants. He calls them dragons. He calls them gods. Maybe we should listen to the guy who wrote the book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we should take it on a bit of faith. You had mentioned the bit about Josephus and the unable to drop a plumb line down, to reach the bottom of the depth. I'm going to ask you a real surface level pop culture question that just popped into my head. Is that maybe why you're going to laugh when I mention this, in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when he's stepping, the freakiest part in that whole movie to me is when he's trying to spell out the name of Jehovah on the steps and he misses one and he almost falls into this like bottomless chasm.
Yeah.
That's underneath him, and then he crawls his way back. I don't know why. It was just really freaky. I mean, you're not expecting it. And then, he gets back up and he like goes across the bridge, and on either side of the bridge, it's like this bottomless chasm. And it's in, I think I remember correctly. I don't know if it was supposed to be in Petra, but they filmed it in Petra.
Right.
Right.
So I don't know. Yeah. I was always this is what we love about you, Derek. Like, you give Michael Heiser a lot of credit for being, the guy who makes all this stuff accessible, but we're actually just talking about it before we sent you the link. We're always love talking to Derek because he is like the most well-rounded,
gets our movie references as well as our deep questions.
You make this stuff really accessible.
Yeah.
Well, that's our goal, is to take it and because, like you said, if we had heard this stuff when we were kids, teens in church would have been so much more interesting. I would have been totally, like I said, if I knew then what I know now, I would have studied archaeology.
Yeah,
because God bless the archaeologists. But now I'm 61, and I found that getting into the central core at Gilgal Rephaim was a lot harder than it was when we were there 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So my balance is not quite as good as it was 4 years ago. I'm not sure what's up with that. But
I got a question.
God bless the archaeologists to do it. But yeah, the Petra thing was really interesting. It was kind of sad this year when we went there, though, because they've got these Bedouin junk dealers who are selling Chinese-made touristy trinkets that they've allowed a lot farther into Petra than they were 4 years ago.
Really?
So yeah, so it's kind of sad as you're walking through these areas and you're seeing these beautiful tombs carved into the rock by the Nabateans 2,000 years ago. And in the foreground, you've got these folks that are hawking these cheap Chinese earrings and stuff. It's kind of sad.
My friend, you can have this holy grail for $5.
Yeah. And they're really, and the ones who approach you while you're walking through, you really have to. It's almost like that scene from Airplane where the person walking through the airport is having like punched the.
They're aggressive about it.
The Moonies and stuff who kept getting in the way. Would you like to make a donation? Bam! Because they won't leave you alone.
Yeah.
If you talk to them, and one of the ladies, God bless her, she's just a sweet lady in her 70s, and the guy came up and he started talking to her, and he said, "No, thank you, I'm not interested." Well, okay, we told people before we got to Petra, do not make eye contact, do not speak to them, because once you do, in their culture, they believe they have a right to sell you something, and they will not leave you alone until you buy. And I'll tell you, Sharon went mama bear on this one lady. This one dude, was like 6'3", and he was just pestering this lady who was like 4'6", and just would not leave her alone. And Sharon just went, and she pushed the guy back and said, "Back off, leave her alone."
And he did.
He did. Well, yeah, he cussed at her, but he did. But our guides would tell us before you get there, don't talk to him, don't make eye contact, never buy Bedouin silver, because Bedouin silver is actually tin. So.
Awesome.
Giving us salespeople a bad name. Thanks, Bedouin.
Yeah, I know.
It reminds me. I wrote a book about. I've never published it. A novel about Greek mercenaries. This band of mercenaries, traveling through after the Second Peloponnesian or Persian War, and I had this one guy in the outfit. They're all a bunch of like vagabonds, because they're just mercenaries.
Yeah.
And I had this one guy who, like, anytime they go into a bazaar, they would always get mobbed like that. But he had the ability to projectile vomit at will.
They'll do it.
Yeah. So anytime someone would come up and they're in those bazaars, and they forgot their haggling beards, because they didn't watch Life of Brian the night before, he'd just, right on them, and they, go running away.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is an awesome superpower.
Right. Vomitus Rex. Anyways,
Derek,
sorry.
I have a question for you. You mentioned Jonathan Cahn, and I read his book recently, The Return of the Gods.
Yeah.
And as I was reading, and I just finished it this past week, and as I was reading it, and it was fantastic. And he really touches on, Baal, Ishtar, and Molech as being the gods that have returned, and they're influencing, well, particularly American culture. And the whole time I was reading, I was like, this is a great thing to read before reading The Second Coming of Saturn, because it gives you an introduction to these ancient beings and what they're about. And then in The Second Coming of Saturn, you really tear off layer after layer after layer of these gods, particularly Molech, So anyway, my question related to that is, there has been in our culture recently an onslaught of trans activism.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see what your opinion was of how does that tie into the influence of these ancient deities? Are they currently actively alive and promoting this, or is this more just the worship of gods that are locked away? I just wanted to get some clarity on that.
That was one of my questions. Also, I saw a video not too long ago about this called "The Dark Trinity Returns," and I think that's something that's on
Jonathan
everybody's.
Kahn.
It must have been. Yeah, it was Jonathan Kahn. That's right. Yeah. Derek, can you talk about that?
First of all, I was blessed to be on the panel at Skywatch TV when we interviewed Jonathan about that, about his book, and we're delighted that he chose this as his subject for this book, because he's going to reach an audience with this concept that would never read Mike Heiser, much less Derek Gilbert or Sharon Gilbert. He does an excellent job, and one thing he really does that goes way beyond what we did is show the influence in the present day.
Yeah,
we dig a lot into the ancient texts, things that we can verify. Showing the veneration of the giants was actually, I think, more important than the fact that there were actual giants walking around. The cult that they inspired after their deaths, as demonic spirits, was more important to us today, and more important to the Israelites in the time of David even, than the fact that there may have been guys of unusual size, warriors of unusual size walking around. Jonathan shows their influence on the present day with Baal, who Jesus in Matthew 12, verses 22 through 26, identified as Satan. Jesus is confronted by a group that says, well, he's casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, Baal the prince. And Jesus says, if Satan casts out demons by his own power, how will Satan's kingdom stand? Oh, okay. And of course, in Revelation 2, verse 13, the letter to the church at Pergamum, Jesus says, I know where you live, where Satan dwells, which is a reference to the great altar of Zeus. Zeus is just the Greek form of Baal. Same God, different name. So, okay, that's Satan. Molech, who again I argue is Shemiyaza and Apollyon. I go deeper into the identity, but Jonathan shows, which I touch on in the Second Coming of Saturn, the influence of this entity to this day. Now I believe this entity is one of the sons of God who's locked away in chains in gloomy darkness, according to Peter, 2 Peter 2, verse 4. The angels who sinned, God thrust them down to, the Bible says hell, but it's Tartarosus, it's Tartarus, not Hades. It's a level below. It's reserved. It's double secret probation for the spirit realm.
Yeah, because
it's not darkness; it's gloomy darkness.
It's ultra darkness. Well, it's the only time that place is mentioned in the Bible. Is that right?
That's correct. And as Mike Heiser said, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important. So
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to take note of this, that this is the only place in the Bible that Peter, operating under the influence of the Holy Spirit, used that word. It's the only place in the Bible. Tartarus is even mentioned. Other places it's referred to as the bottomless pit or the abyss. But here, confirmation. God took sinning angels, and when you read 2 Peter 2 and Jude in context, it's clear it was a sexual sin they committed, which can only refer to Genesis chapter 6. That's the only place in the Bible where we read of something like that. So this entity is one of those, which begs the question, how can he influence the world to this day? And I go into that in some depth in the Second Coming of Saturn. But, the same way a mafia boss influences action on the street, from a prison cell. Yeah. He's got minions. And these characters have demonic minions. In fact, in the book, Second Coming of Saturn, I go into some speculation with Ezekiel chapter 32, which make reference to the chiefs of the Gibborim, or the mighty chiefs in the midst of Sheol. They're in Sheol, but they seem to have some connection to Asher. In Ezekiel 32, it's Assyria, but Asher was another name for Enlil, El, Dagon, Molech, Shemiyaza. Asher in the far reaches of the pit. So I think, again, it's speculative because the Bible's not explicit, but I think they're using their demonic minions to communicate their desires. And you look at the number one cause of death on earth today, and Jonathan goes into this in his book, Return to the Gods. The number one cause of death on planet Earth is not any disease. It's not smoking or alcoholism or suicide or drunk driving. It is abortion.
Yep.
Abortion, far and away the most, like 42 million, according
Yeah,
to the World Health Organization, on one part of their website. On another part of their website, they say it was as many as 75 million abortions per year worldwide. This is far more than all communicable diseases, yes, including the Rona, combined. And so if you don't think that that entity, who in every one of his iterations, Molech, Saturn, Kronos, Baal, Haman, was connect Dagon, whose epithet or nickname was Lord of the Corpse, or Lord of the Corpse offering, connected to the underworld. It's you're just really blinding yourself to the reality of the spirit realm. And of course, then you've got the third member of this dark trinity that Jonathan writes about, Ishtar or Inanna, or the Queen of Heaven, known as Astarte in the Bible.
Right.
Aphrodite to the Greeks, Venus to the Romans. She's not a goddess of love. She's a goddess of wanton carnality. Basically, if it feels good, do it. And if it's twisted, who cares? Anything goes. In ancient Sumer, there are hymns that are almost 5,000 years old that still exist, praising her for being able to change men into women and women into men. And, the influence of this goddess, who sometimes manifested as a god. I mean, the Hurrians had an equivalent to this entity. Her name was Shauska. There's a very famous inscription found in Turkey that depicts all of the main gods of the Hurrians on one wall and all the main goddesses on the other wall. And Shauska is on both. Okay.
Really?
Okay.
That's who Inanna or Ishtar was. There's one hymn where she calls herself a young woman, but she's also, when she's in the tavern or the ale house, she's also an exuberant young man. Okay. She can be either or both, or neither. Gender is a spectrum. This is a very old idea. Yes, this is a very old idea. Her followers were either transvestites, or they were, in the case of men, they were castrato. And they would have to do it to themselves. And this is also seen in the cult of Attis in Asia Minor, in Anatolia, Turkey. So this is not a new thing that we're seeing today. I mean, we look at the recent flap over Bud Light and think, oh, okay, this is, what are these progressives going to do next? Well, it's not progressive; it is regressive. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai around the year 1406 BC or thereabouts, or 1446 BC, all of the law with, okay, don't do this thing that the Amorites are doing, and don't do this thing that the Amorites are doing. That was new. That was progressive. So it is basically returning to the old pagan ways of 4,000, 5,000 years ago. And this is what is happening with the devolution of Western civilization. As we move into a post-Christian culture, it is really an anti-Christian culture. You really got to feel sorry for the atheists like Richard Dawkins, who thought that once we move past Christianity, we'd put aside all of this, what they think is superstition of religion, move into a Star Trek reality of reason and logic. And no, we're going back to the old pagan ways, which is bloodier, bloodier than anything from the Christian era.
Man.
So God bless Jonathan Cahn for bringing it to the public.
He's been killing it lately. I mean, the videos have
everywhere.
They've been really, really good. And what's funny is they try to how can I make this YouTube friendly? They try to convince you that what is happening now and its permissiveness and its acceptance, tolerance, is no different than what it was back in antiquity. And they say, well, all the Greeks were gay and all the Romans were bisexual and everybody was just into everything, and it's great. I mean, it didn't have a problem with it back then. Why would we have a problem with it now? But then, like, when you actually start reading Greek literature of the time, quote unquote, of what the Greeks actually were like, the Greeks were not down for any of that. Like, it was, now you still had your cults, you still had your sects, you still had your weird adrenochrome drinking,
Well, you had the worship of
elu-
some of those gods that
elitists.
required some of that.
Absolutely. But the rank and file, like standardized Greek attitude back then was way more less tolerant, quote unquote, than anything going on in the buckle of the Bible Belt today. But they tried to convince you that, like, it was all
normal in
it was
antiquity.
normal back then, so why didn't you make it normal now?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
A lot of modern scholarship into the cult of Inanna or Ishtar is really focusing on how progressive she was, and tearing down
mhm.
gender norms 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. But the fact is, and this is one aspect of the second coming of Saturn I did not expect to get into, but Sharon pointed this out as she was looking at the January 6th incident.
Oh yeah.
You're familiar with the painting on the underside of the Capitol dome, the apotheosis of Washington.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, highly
Well,
occultic.
Yep, and she pointed out that in one of the panels there on agriculture, a character identified as Young America is in that panel with the Grain Goddess series, and Young America is depicted wearing a Phrygian cap. That's that kind of floppy red cap that um, is similar to a Santa Claus hat, but without the
The ball on
puffy
the
ball on the end. Yeah.
end.
This ostensibly was there because in the 19th century it was supposed to represent freedom. Okay, but when you go back and you look at Greek, and for all we know, Constantino Bromidi, who painted the dome, I don't know what he believed and why he chose to put this up there. I don't know enough about that to speak to that. But what we do know is that depiction of young America wearing that Phrygian cap is very reminiscent of the depiction of a character from Greek mythology named Ganymede.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was a Trojan prince whose father was the king of Troy, who was seen by Zeus from afar, who saw that he was a comely young man. And he
Mhm.
was so comely, in fact, that Zeus turned himself into, and remember, Zeus equals Baal equals Satan.
Right.
Okay, turned himself into an eagle and swooped down and caught up Ganymede and took him off to Olympus. When you look at the ancient depictions of that event, it's pretty clear what the eagle is doing to Ganymede while he's flying away with him.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it was
Gotcha.
literally called the rape of Ganymede. Okay,
Yeah.
and then of course, it's cleaned up so that when we studied Greek mythology in school, it's like, well, he liked this young boy so much that he made him the cupbearer to the gods, and when he died, he was placed in the heavens. Like, okay,
Cupbearer, huh? Oh,
yeah.
that's what we're
Well,
calling it these days.
the Romans, yeah, the Romans named him Catamitus, which is where we get the term catamite, which means the
Yes,
younger
that's right.
submissive partner to an older man. But here's the thing, Plato, okay, Plato, writing in the 4th century BC, 5th century BC,
Mhm.
said it was the people of Crete who made up this story because we know that they enjoy this, unnatural physical act. And
Yeah.
so they're saying they're just following the law of Zeus because Zeus did this to Ganymede, so it must be okay for us as well.
Oh,
And
of course.
that was how. So you're right to your point, Jonathan. That yeah, the rank and file Greeks were not as on board with this lifestyle as modern academics want us to think.
Yeah. Well, they did it with warrior cultures. I noticed it 20 years ago. It was like all of a sudden, all the Spartans were gay, all the samurai were gay, all the knights are gay, everybody's gay, everybody masculine and cool. Crusaders are gay. David and Jonathan were gay.
Yep.
No, they weren't. Yeah, it's like you're so starved for like masculinity, and we men have allowed our own Western civilization to be so emasculated that we don't even understand like battle brother culture anymore.
Right.
And there was this whole thing of like, who was it? The Thespians, the 300 sacred band that defeated the Spartans, and they were all a bunch of gay couples, and it's just gay, 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 and you're just like, no, it's not. No, yeah, sorry. Anyways, I'm like a chihuahua.
Bone of contention. Bone of
I'm the Chihuahua who has found his bone of contention. I'm just chewing on it.
But Ganymede though, isn't that the Greek equivalent of the Roman Aquarius? Isn't that Aquarius?
Well, yeah, when he was placed in the sky, it was Aquarius, and that was really the odd thing that connects January 6th back to Saturn, because the great conjunction of December 21st of 2020, we were told, hey, it's the Christmas star. We got Jupiter and Saturn meeting in the sky. This must be the star, the Christmas star that the wise men followed. Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. And we've got very clear skies here without much light pollution in the Ozarks. And okay, it's neat. You got two bright planets up there, but boy, this would not make me get on a camel and ride 4 months across the desert.
Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
according to astrologers, they called this the Great Mutation because they believe this signifies, under classical archaeology, the final full entry into the age of Aquarius, which mean because Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and it is a move into a new age of, the return of the Golden Age, as they believe, prophesied by the Roman poet Virgil around the year 40 BC. Returns, justice returns old Saturn's reign with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. So we moved into the age of Aquarius, where now Saturn has reclaimed his throne from Jupiter, or this is like El reclaiming the throne from Baal, or Kronos retaking the throne from Zeus, and the new breed of men sent down from heaven. Yeah, they think this will inaugurate a new golden age. So I don't think it's a coincidence that a month after this, late January of 2021, the World Economic Forum officially rolled out its platform for the Great Reset Initiative, which I've dubbed Build Back Babel, because really that's what they're trying to do.
Brilliant. That's brilliant, Derek. I love that.
Please make that the title of your next book.
Please coin that.
It's actually the title of my presentation for the new Defender virtual conference for Skywatch TV.
Is it?
But
Okay,
really, that's
cool.
what they're trying. That's what they're trying to do, is to recreate the kingdom of Nimrod, which is Babel, going back more than 5,000 years, which was a kingdom that was based around the idea that everybody served Nimrod. The archaeological type find, the artifact that will identify a site as belonging to the kingdom of Uruk, the kingdom of Nimrod, in Mesopotamia, in Iraq, or southern Turkey, is a little thing that they call the beveled rim bowl, which is a really crudely made bowl of white clay. It's not fired, it's not glazed. It looks like a kid made it out of Play-Doh, but they'll find hundreds of these at dump sites, sometimes thousands. They were like the equivalent of fast food containers. And according to texts found in ancient Sumer and clues from the Sumerian pictograms or logograms, they've concluded that your serfs, your working stiffs who had to go out in the field and work for the temple priestly class, would get a bowl of whatever, barley or something. Here's your daily allotment. Here's your universal basic income.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go out and work, and then you throw the bowl away because it was useless for anything else. It couldn't hold liquid.
Yeah.
So it was used like once and then tossed away. So that's what they're trying to recreate. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Yeah. Here's your bowl of barley. Shut up and be happy, slave.
Yeah, your chitinous shells, you're crunched up that your body can't even digest.
That's right.
Here's your crickets.
Your cricket. Here's your cricket money. Derek, I'm trying to remember. Have you covered a lot of this stuff in the Second Coming of Saturn?
Some of that. Didn't get into the stuff with Nimrod so much. That has been in a couple of other books that have been published by Defender, anthologies, for Tom Horn. But
I was gonna say,
that will probably that'll probably come out in a book, one of our books somewhere.
Maybe we've just talked about it, or maybe I just dreamed it. I could have sworn, I was like, man, I know Derek has talked about this before in something that I've read, or I must have listened to it. So anyway, sorry.
What was cool was seeing one of those at the British Museum. That's why we love museums. You go to a museum and you find something that you've been studying, looking at pictures of for a long time. And it's like, oh my gosh, the Sutton Hoo helmet. And people in the library are looking at you like, what's with the American? Um,
Yeah.
we had the opportunity to visit the archaeology museum in Amman at the Amman Citadel, which is
Cool.
located on the hill in the capital of Jordan, next to a temple of. They think it's a temple of Hercules, and I'm not sure that they found an inscription that identifies it as such. They found the remnants of a massive statue, part of the right hand and part of an elbow. The hand is like as big as my chest. I mean my
Whoa.
torso. Just that little bit that they found. So it's massive, and they got three massive columns that are bigger than anything anywhere else in the Roman Empire. This is a Roman temple that was built on top of a temple to Milcom, the chief god of the Ammonites. In other words, this temple was built on top of a temple to Molech.
Moloch, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And inside this archaeology museum, they've got some anthropomorphic statues, human-like statues that are the oldest ever found, that go back about 9,000 years, that were found in Amman, Jordan. But what's
Jeez.
weird is that these statues, which are about 2.5, 3 feet high, a couple of them are two-headed, or as scholars would say, bicephalic. Two-headed statues made of lime plaster and reeds. And a lime plaster is not something you could go down to the Home Depot back in the day and buy. You had to take limestone, crush it up, heat it to a couple thousand degrees, and according to what I've read about these things, they were not intended to last very long, exposed to the elements, which means the only reason they still exist is that they were buried immediately after they were created.
Hmm.
We also saw some of the Jericho skulls, which is
Were they
really
elongated? Were they elongated?
no.
Okay.
No, they were natural shaped, but what's odd about them, and this was found at a number of other sites from the Neolithic period. So again, we're talking 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
These were found at Jericho, which is not all that far from Amman, Jordan. They were removed from the rest of the remains of the ancestor who had died. Okay, so your elderly father passes away. You put him out somewhere until the birds, pick all the bones clean.
Yeah.
Then you take the head and you plaster it and put it on display on a shelf in your home. You can do a Google search for Jericho skulls, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
It is really weird, but they found them at a number of sites from the Neolithic, from what they call the Natufian period, that date to about 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, from southern Turkey, from Jericho, and from a couple of other sites in Jordan. Really weird. I'm glad we got to see them. And again, it was kind of a cool thing because we've been reading about these, seeing pictures of these things, and suddenly you're looking at it through a glass case. It's like,
Uh-huh.
man, kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Were they still practicing? Do they know if they were still practicing that kind of, I don't know what the necro version of that would, necro worship, or memorialization when the conquest of Canaan happened?
Well, we don't know. But what is interesting is we've talked to Dr. Stephen Collins, who is leading the team that just concluded its 16th season of excavations at a site in Jordan called Tal El Hammam. It's right across the Jordan River from Jericho. We believe they made the case that it is the site of ancient Sodom.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a city up on a hill that enclosed like 85 acres inside its walls. And to give you an idea, this was destroyed according to carbon 14. And okay, carbon 14 is not the most accurate in the
Right.
world, but
Sure.
the pottery that they found confirms a dating to the Middle Bronze Age. In other words, the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay.
It was completely destroyed. Unlike an earthquake where mud bricks will shake in all directions, these were all blown in one direction from southwest and northeast. So now this is located about 8 miles northeast of the Dead Sea. One of the aspects of his research that's really interesting that it kind of gets overlooked because making the claims like, hey, we think we found Sodom, everybody focuses on that, and you get some people thinking this is awesome, this is great biblical confirmation. Then of course you get others, skeptics, who say these are Bible thumping Christians who are just trying to prove the Bible, and other Christians are saying that can't be right because we know that it was southeast of the Dead Sea, so it's in the wrong place.
Right.
Whatever. He mentions in his book about the discovery. This was published back in 2014. That at the base of the hill, they found like 1,500 dolmens. Now, dolmens are those megalithic funerary monuments that
Mhm.
in that part of Jordan, they're mainly like two big vertical slabs of limestone with a tabletop
Yeah.
slab. I mean,
Yeah.
dolmen is a Brittonic word, a Celtic word that means table. They found one on the side of a hill that had not been robbed out, which is amazing when you think about it, because it's almost 4,000 years old.
Yeah.
And somehow in the intervening 3,700 years, nobody had found it to go in and steal the stuff that was inside.
Wow.
So they found a few bones here and there, which means they were not used for depositing the complete remains of the ancestors, but individual bones, a finger bone, an arm bone, whatever,
Sure.
along with other deposits like pottery, jewelry, and things like that. From what they can tell, and they've not published an article on this yet, they got so much data. They're going to be working for the next 10 years just publishing what they've already collected. But he told us in an interview that it appeared that this dolmen had been pretty much in constant use from the time the city was created around 4000 BC down to the time it was destroyed in 1700 BC.
Whoa.
I mean, think about that. That's 2,300 years of use.
Yeah.
That's like from the time of Alexander the Great destroying, taking Jerusalem in battle to us having this conversation.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is a long time. And how they think these were used in that region, going back that far. Now, that doesn't go back as far as the Jericho skulls, but it gives you an idea of what the descendants of the people who created the Jericho skulls were doing. They think they would take the deceased ancestors, put them out on top of the dolmen, on the tabletop, to be defleshed, a sky burial.
Mhm.
And then once the bones were clean, they would take them and put them into a jar, a large jar,
Mm-hmm.
and deposit them in a shaft tomb, because they found those down in the valley closer to the Dead Sea. And then once a year, perhaps, on some special night, they would go to the tomb, they would take out a bone, and they would deposit it in the dolmen with some sort of offering. The dolmen looking almost like a portal when you think about it, kind of like the big trilithons at Stonehenge, two
Yeah.
big vertical slabs with a tabletop. It almost looks like a doorway.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah.
And so the thought is that that's just perhaps believed to be a doorway between that realm and
Mhm.
this. And bear in mind that this is in the very same region that the stations of the Exodus, as the Israelites are arriving at the plains of Moab, are named Ovoth, which means spirits of the dead, and Ai Ha'avarim, which means ruins of the travelers. And the travelers was a term used by the Canaanites for the spirits of the Rephaim, in other words, demons.
Yeah.
So it was known that there was something about that region where there was a lot of supernatural, spiritual activity.
Mhm.
And Moses and the Israelites arrive 400 years after the destruction of Sodom, see this ruined city on a hill, and all of these megalithic burial monuments at the base. There are some who believe that Moses and the Israelites may have pitched the tabernacle on that hill, on the site of ancient Sodom, above the temple, right on top of what had been the temple of Sodom. So,
That would have been
again, more sacred geography and a tug of war for that, because it was right there when the Israelites began to worship the Baal of Peor. And Peor is based on a Hebrew word that means entrance or opening to the netherworld. They were literally worshiping the Lord of the entrance to the gates of hell.
Yeah. It's funny. It still exists in pop culture, man. It's in Ghostbusters. The Traveler has come.
Yeah.
And
That's